So now that we have our prediction results, the next thing that we need to do will be to select the place that we want to go to from the list of prediction. So when we click on any of the places, we want to go ahead and retrieve more details about that particular place by making use of the place ID. And one of the most important details that we'll be retrieving will be the location coordinates of that selected place. So how are we going to do this? We are essentially going to be making use of the place ID to perform a place details request. So in the article preceding this particular lecture, I've added the link to the documentation so we can go ahead and visit so that we can get more information about the place details request. It's very straightforward and easy to understand. But then let's quickly take a look at an example of a place details request, which is what I have here. So we simply appended the place ID and our map key to the URL. So you can also find the example URL in the article preceding this lecture. So as you can see, there is numerous details about this particular place. But the key information of interest here will be the place name and the formatted address, and most importantly, the location coordinates. So now we know exactly what to do and how to do it. Let's go ahead and integrate this into our application. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up our Android Studio. Alright, now the first thing we need to do is to make our list tile to be clickable. So inside of our prediction tile, I'm going to go ahead and wrap our container inside a flat button. So I'm going to hold down the shift key and tap the enter button, and I'm going to wrap this into a new widget, and the widget is going to be a flat button. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and set the padding property to 0. So let's go ahead and build to confirm that everything is still fine. Okay, so everything looks good. Now the next thing I'm going to do will be to add the onPressed callback. Now the next thing we need to do will be to go ahead and create a new method that can actually help us to perform the place details request. So I'm going to scroll up a little bit and I'm going to create a new method. So I'm going to call this method getPlaceDetails. So this method is going to take in a parameter, and the parameter is going to be the place ID. Alright, now the next thing we need to do will be to go ahead and provide our URL. So I'm going to go ahead and paste the string that we copied earlier on. Now the next thing we need to do will be to go ahead and replace these values accordingly. So right here, I'm going to go ahead and delete this place ID. Instead, I'm going to replace this with the variable place ID. And also, I'm going to go ahead and replace the key with our map key. And our map key is already a global variable, so we can easily access it. So we have our map key. So that's all we need to do with our URL. I'm going to retype this. Now all we need to do will be to go ahead and perform the request. So I'm going to have a response. This will be equal to await. Alright, so because this is going to be an asynchronous method, so we need to add the async signature. So here I'm going to have request helper. So I usually go ahead and type this out so that Android Studio can help me automatically import the file. But in case this doesn't work for you, you can try the second time, or you can manually go ahead and import this particular file. So here I'm going to go ahead and have get request and pass my URL. Now the first thing we need to do will be to verify that our response is correct. So I'm going to say if response is equal to failed. So if this is equal to failed, it means that our request actually failed. So I'm going to go ahead and exit this method. If it doesn't, I'm going to go ahead and try to retrieve the content of the response. So if I navigate back to the example request, you can see that for every successful request, the status is going to be okay. So we need to go ahead and first of all check the status before we can retrieve the values contained inside of this response. So here I can simply go ahead and say if response and status is equal to OK. So if this is the case, we can now go ahead and retrieve the details that are important to us. What I'm going to do will be to define a new instance of address. So I'm going to call this place. This is going to be equal to new address. The first thing we need to do will be to retrieve the place name. So I'm going to have displays. So for us to know the exact value that we're retrieving, we can refer back to the example response, and this is the name. So I can simply go ahead and copy the path. So like I mentioned earlier, the JSON viewer is actually what I'm using, to be able to display my JSON in this format. So in case you want that, you can go ahead and install the Google Chrome extension. So I'm going to copy the path and return back to Android Studio and paste this here. So I'm actually looking for result.name, but this is not exactly how we need to write it. So I'm going to go ahead and say response, results, and name. Right. Now the next thing we need to do will be to retrieve the place ID. We already have that, but let's just go ahead and add it up. Now the next thing we need to retrieve will be the latitude and longitude coordinates, and we can find it in the geometry. So look at it here. So we have the geometry, we have location, latitude, geometry, location, longitude. So let's go ahead and get that as well. Okay, so we have that. So we need to go ahead and do the same thing for our longitude. So I'm gonna have displays dot longitude. Alright, so we have that as well. So this is basically how we can go ahead and retrieve the details of a particular place. So what are we going to do with this address? So we are going to consider this address to be our destination, or more like the destination that we have in mind. Now we need to go ahead and save this address inside our data provider class so that we can always access it from anywhere within our application. So what I'm going to do will be to open the data provider class, which I usually call the app data. So I'm going to create a new instance, or a new address instance. So I'm going to call this destination address, and I'm going to go ahead and create a new method that will allow us to update the destination address. So I'm going to create a new method. I'm going to call it update destination address. So this method is going to take in a parameter, as we all know. Then destination address is going to be equal to destination, and then we can now go ahead and notify listeners. So let's return back into our prediction tile. So we can now go ahead and try to save our destination address. So to do that, we can simply go ahead and say provider. So we've actually done something similar earlier on, so I'm very certain that there won't be anything confusing here. So I'm going to have provider.org, right? So we're going to go ahead and import our app data. I'm going to go ahead and update the destination address, and I'm going to pass in displays as an argument. Bam. So how are we going to resolve this? Before we get to this part, we need to go ahead and set the listing property to false. And to resolve this issue, I can simply go ahead and pass the context as a parameter to this method. Alright, so this will go ahead and resolve this. Now, to confirm that everything worked just the way we expect, I think it just makes some sense that we print maybe the place name to the console window. Now that this method is ready, let's go ahead and make use of it. So we are simply going to call the getPlaceDetails method here, and the place ID is going to come from the prediction instance that we passed into the prediction tile. So we're gonna have prediction.placeID. Alright, now that everything is ready, I'm going to go ahead and restart our application. Alright, so our application has successfully restarted. So I'm going to go ahead and search for Spark PH. Okay, so let's go ahead and select any of this, and bam! So as you can see, the name of the place was well displayed in the console window. So this only means one thing, that our implementation is working just the way we expect. Now another thing that we can do is to add a progress bar. Say for instance your internet connectivity is pretty slow. So while this place details request is going on, we kind of have to tell the user to hold on. We're actually making some requests. So what we need to do will be to go ahead and add a progress bar to kind of improve the user experience of our application. So I've actually done something similar so far in the course. So I'm going to go ahead and say show dialog. Alright, so inside of the dialog, I'm going to set the barrier dismissible to false, and the context is going to be context. And the next thing we need to do will be to go ahead and set the builder. So we're going to return our progress dialog as a builder. And the next thing we need to do will be to pass in the status. We can simply say please wait. Alright, so the builder is actually referring to the view that we want to use as our dialog. Alright, so at what point are we going to dismiss this dialog? We are going to dismiss this dialog as soon as the request is complete. So I'm going to have navigator.pop. So this will go ahead and close the dialog. So to verify that this works as well, I'm going to go ahead and restart our application. Okay, so our application has been restarted. So I'm going to go ahead and search a destination, and my destination is always going to be SparkPH most of the time. Alright, so let's go ahead and select this, and bam, as you can see, we saw our progress dialog and it vanished afterwards. And bam. So we are now able to retrieve more information about a particular place, which is actually going to be our destination. Now in the upcoming classes, we're going to see how we can prepare ourselves to go on a trip by drawing polylines and doing some other things on the map and making use of the information we have about our current location and our destination. It's really going to be interesting. So as soon as you're ready, head over to the next lesson so we can get started. But this will be all for now, so see you in the next class.